This one is called Lampedusa. And I've got a quote from Franz Kafka. The man in ecstasy and the man drowning both throw up their arms. That's from the Blue Octavo notebooks. Geographically, Lampedusa is the southernmost point of Italy, and it's the first point of call for immigrants fleeing Africa and coming into Europe. I focus on that quote because it establishes the Mediterranean as like this place of both torture and pleasure. And I am interested in that dichotomy of the space. It's really interesting. And it relates back to this fascination, like I talked about before, with islands and how they're a first port of call. They're like a transitory place. There's something that you pass by. You come back to Ellis Island, Lampedusa, Manus Island, Pacific Islands. And the painting was inspired by a text by Franz Kafka, which was called In the Penal Colony. It was printed in 1919, and so I felt it was pertinent to do some research about it because I made this painting in 2019. So the premise of the story is about archetypal characters being on an island, and there being a torture device on this island, and the torture device inscribes the punishment on its subject. It's noted that it's a colony within the text and that it's somewhere hot, so it's probably, around the Pacific, around the equator. So all of these things, and the fact that there's corporal punishment, and the fact that, it was a dubious legal thing within the book, it just really spoke to me about the plight of asylum seekers coming out of Australia, coming out of Afghanistan and being subject to Australian law on an island in the middle of nowhere, basically. I thought that it was an important thing to talk about, and that was the basis of the inspiration of this work.
It's an important theme in your work. They're a key theme in your work.
It is. And I've kept coming back into that. And I keep coming into elements that keep bringing me back into that with islands and with sovereign power and with the law and with dissent. So, yeah, there are many things that keep me bringing back to punishment and surveillance. And the way that punishment is changing.
And the surface texture on this painting, you use paintbrushes and?
I use paintbrushes and knives, spatulas, hands, and different implements used for different things, like tiling device, a tool for putting in the grout of tiling. So, for example, for me, it speaks both to its historical nature, because there's something there that reminds me of Turner with this painting. Not the thickness of the paint, but the allusion to like something with a sea. Like some of the Turner paintings are incredibly abstract. And then he brings it all together with a tiny little boat somewhere. And you go, oh, yes, of course. Or a dog. And you say, oh, yes, of course. That's what it is, right? But it also feels contemporary to me in the terms of the paint handling, because there is that grooved gradation through the paint that I've done with this device.
Yes, it creates diagonals in the actual surface rather than colour.
Yeah, well, instead of the colour being blended, I've let the colour stay flat. Where Turner would be blending colours, it stayed much more flat in patches, a little bit like Polyakov, Serge Polyakov, in that sense, that there's sort of look like cut out things. But despite that, still the blue and the yellow, there's a little bit of blending there with the brush, but it still comes across as a romantic application of paint because it's quite loose in the way that it's put on.
And it speaks of the sea, certainly.
Without being too rigid with the perspective or representation.
Yes.
Yeah.